Air defence remains a key issue in the war in Ukraine, despite NATO pledging new Patriot air defence systems.
NATO allies say the alliance will only survive if Russia is defeated in its war against Ukraine.
NATO allies have branded China a decisive enabler of Russia's war in Ukraine.
Authorities in Albania request assistance from the European Union to tackle wildfires burning in the south of the country.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer says it's time for Britain to reset relations with the EU.
Air defence remains a key issue in the war in Ukraine as Russian forces slowly but steadily advance in the Donetsk area. Drone and artillery strikes struck across Ukraine, with regional governors saying 7 were killed, including a 15-year-old boy. A further 43 were reportedly injured. The Ukrainian military also said 120 combat clashes were recorded between Moscow and Kyiv's forces. They report that Russia dropped guided air bombs, carried out missile strikes and ground attacks against Ukrainian strategic positions. In turn, Ukrainian media report that Kyiv's defense forces hit Russian control points and artillery systems. Ukraine has been the primary focus for NATO leaders at its recent summit, with US President Joe Biden announcing a new military aid package that includes a brand new Patriot system.
Будуть зараз і 2 нові безпекові угоди та угода в підтримка санкцій проти Росії, підтримка нашого вступу в ЄС і НАТО, підтримка нашого захисту, наших воїнів, всіх наших людей. Відбудови, все це ми враховуємо в безпекових угодах саме так, як потрібно.
The Patriots are part of a swell of pledges to get air defence systems to Ukraine to help it fend off Russian attacks, including one of the conflict's bloodiest after a children's hospital in Kyiv was hit earlier this week.
At least 2 people have been killed and 4 others injured in a landslide in northeastern Slovakia. The local rescue service said the landslide in the Monka Valley had been triggered by intense thunderstorms and torrential rain. The landslide engulfed a tourist shelter, trapping 16 people inside. The mountain rescue service said the famous hiking trail had been closed until further notice.
NATO allies say their alliance will only survive if Russia is defeated in its war against Ukraine. The 32 countries announced a series of new pledges to Kyiv as Russia continues to pound civilian areas, including targeting a children's hospital at the start of the week. They include 5 new Patriot air defence systems and a joint announcement by the US, the Netherlands and Denmark that the first F-16 fighter jets would be in the hands of Ukrainian military pilots by this summer.
Well, I think the Patriot systems are pretty important in terms of they're able to intercept hypersonic missiles, sort of the things that are most damaging Ukrainian civilian and critical national infrastructure. But it's not just about the launchers, it's about the number of interceptors, it's about the ammunition as well, and that's going to have to be a continuous requirement for the Ukrainians. On the F-16, again, they'll be very, very valuable to the Ukrainians, but they're not going to be a game changer. They're not going to enable in of themselves for Ukraine to take back much territory anytime soon.
We saw just horrifying images, attacks on hospitals, like where are we on the battlefield in the east, and just generally speaking, is it as dire as it has been a few months ago?
Yeah, and I think to deal with the strike first, I mean, it was pretty much deliberate policy by the Kremlin to strike on Monday ahead of the summit to try and get onto the news cycle and show those within Europe who are more timid towards Ukrainian membership and a greater role for NATO within the war to say this is what escalation might look like in your own countries. I think that's partly backfired in the sense of the Patriot systems and the other air defence systems being provided and NATO actually standing up and saying, you know, that is absolutely not acceptable. If you give them the ammunition and the capabilities, they're more than happy to hold the ground, they're more than happy to take large-scale casualties, but the Russians are taking more In the last 6 weeks, it seems that an average of about 1,200 Russians have either been died or killed or wounded on the battlefield. That's a battle group a day, but they're still on the offensive. So it just shows how difficult the position on the ground at the moment is.
Well, one of the ambitions for this summit was to make permanent or institutionalise NATO's military support for Ukraine so that in the future, the Ukrainian army can have a reliable source of weapons, of air defence systems, and for its soldiers to be properly trained. But another reason is that if Donald Trump does end up back in the White House, he'll find it harder to end or reverse Ukraine's NATO trajectory.
China is a decisive enabler of Russia's war against Ukraine, NATO allies have said at their summit in Washington to mark 75 years of the defensive alliance. The group has hardened its stance on Beijing over China's trade with Russia, accusing it of supplying Moscow with so-called dual-use goods, components that support Putin's war machine. Deputy Secretary General of NATO, Mircea Joanna, tells Euronews that China is a threat to Europe.
A lot of Russia's reconstitution of its armed forces is coming via China. So China is a major enabler, the enabler of Russia's war against Ukraine. We see Iran, we see North Korea, we see a coordination among these countries and Belarus and a few others. So we can look at the situation as we want, but the reality is that there is a pattern of aggressiveness basically fueling the war of Russia in Ukraine. So this means that China is a threat to our security. It means that, of course, they put challenges in many other places, but for us, with war in Europe, China, Iran, Korea helping Russia so dramatically in waging war against Ukraine, against European security, makes China, a partner of Russia that is seen by NATO with more severity than before.
China has responded essentially saying this is very provocative language. Where will this lead to?
And I have to say that the language that we have adopted is also, a more clear language, but also a careful language. We're not declaring China as our enemy. It is not. They are a serious challenge to European security, and this is a fact. And of course, the fact that there is no limit partnership between Russia and China is deepening and becoming more complex, together with the other countries like Iran and North Korea, is adding these issues. Of course, you have not seen in our statement, in our final declaration, any direct actions by NATO, because we are a security organization.
Well, we're seeing in Gaza children having their arms and legs amputated with no anaesthetic, starvation, dozens of children being killed every single day, and no criticism from NATO countries, despite the fact that they say they promote the rules-based system. Is there double standards in this?
As NATO, we are basically not involved in this conflict, and that's why, as an institution, we are relatively, moderate in what we say. But we see allies all calling from the US all the way to a few allies that have been recognizing the state of Palestine in various forms and shades, basically asking for one thing: let's this war stop. Let's have some form of cessation of hostilities, exchange, bring the hostages back, and try to avoid escalation in the Middle East, which will be also another big trouble for us.
Authorities in Albania have requested assistance from the European Union to help tackle wildfires in the south of the country. The Interior Minister said on Thursday that the government had asked for help from the European Commission's Emergency Response Coordination Centre.
Jemi në kontakt me qendrën e mekanizmit evropian të solidaritetit, përmes të cilit duam të vazhdojmë luftën edhe nga ajri, sepse sikur se keni parë, është pothuajse e pamundur që të ndërhyet në një pjesë të madhe të vatrave ekzistuese të zjarrit.
He said firefighters and military personnel were having trouble accessing the remote mountainous areas where the fires are burning, and that they only had one Cougar helicopter at their disposal. There have been numerous wildfires in the southern district of Dropal, 250 kilometers south of the capital Tirana. Albania has been hit by a heat wave with temperatures reaching 42 degrees Celsius in some central areas. The Defence Ministry says that extreme heat has caused at least 23 wildfires to break out in the last 24 hours alone. Meanwhile, the heat wave, which has affected parts of Central and Southern Europe, has sent the mercury rising in nearby Serbia. Authorities there recorded temperatures in the north of around 35 degrees Celsius, and in the capital Belgrade, doctors reported treating people who had collapsed, felt dizzy, or complained of headaches due to the heat. And it's a similar situation in Slovenia. People in the capital Ljubljana have resorted to standing under improvised sprinklers to keep cool. Severe weather warnings are in place in several countries across Europe, with temperatures expected to peak at around 40 degrees Celsius in some areas. One of the main hospitals in Gaza City has partially resumed operations days after evacuating patients and staff. Al-Ali Hospital was abandoned on Monday after the Israeli military issued evacuation orders for parts of Gaza City ahead of an offensive. The military later said it told hospitals and other medical facilities they didn't need to evacuate. With Al-Ali's reopening, 14 of Gaza's 36 hospitals are partially functioning, according to UN figures.